Hi, Ruben here from Muller Energy. Today I want to talk to you about our new 6S to 22S 250 amp BMS. It's a custom BMS made for Muller Energy by JBD, and it's somewhat similar to the 4S BMS that you might be familiar with. Now, this is a 250 amp BMS, or we sell it as a 250 amp BMS. Really, it's a 320 amp BMS, but we derated it to 250 to ensure it doesn't get overly hot. The reason I'm filming this video today is to give you instructions on how to connect this BMS in both a 16S and an 8S configuration. So when you receive your kit, you will have this BMS in it. You'll also have the cables that are attached to the BMS currently in it. And you will either have a 16S balancer for 48 volt systems, or you will have an 8S balancer for 24 volt systems. Now, obviously, you'll have some cables that come with it as well, and we'll get into that in a second. What you'll also need is either 16 or 8 lithium iron phosphate cells to make your 48 or 24 volt battery. Today I'm going to be showing you mainly how to make the 16S BMS, or the 16S battery out of the BMS and the cells, but I'll also give a quick introduction into the 8S, and it's a very, very similar process. So the first thing we have to do with this BMS is to connect to the main negative terminal. Now, you might be able to see it. I've got them set up in an alternating fashion. So we've got, this will be our main negative terminal here. Unfortunately, black is the positive terminal and this gray is the negative. But you do have little plus and minus signs on here as well. So what we do is we take the cable, we put it on here. We'll just put it on there for now. We won't screw it down yet. And we take the other end and we connect it to the B minus on the BMS. So B minus means it's your negative terminal going to the battery. Then on the other side, there's the C minus, which is here. Your C minus will connect to your chargers and your loads. So if you have an inverter, if you have a charger, if you have whatever else, it will connect to this side. Internally, the BMS has MOSFETs. They do switching, and they either let current flow through from C to B or B to C, or they don't. And you can also disable just charging or disable discharging. But that's somewhat outside the scope of this video. This video mainly focuses on how to build the battery itself. So we've got the B minus connected to the BMS. We could now connect this and screw it down. However, we also need the terminal for something else. So here we've got two cables that look quite similar. One has 9 wires, the other has 8 wires. We'll start with a 9-wire one. Also, if you have the 8S active balancer, you will only have this cable. So here the color coordination, fortunately, is a little bit better. So we will take the black for negative, and we will also put it on the negative terminal. Now, in this video, I'm only going to be doing things hand tight. However, even if you're building the battery for real, don't do this one up yet. The end terminals, so the negative and the positive down here, they will come off again to connect something else later. So just leave that like that is fine. The next thing we have to do is to connect bus bars between the cells to make sure current can flow from one cell to the other. Now, if we were to build a battery for real, I highly recommend some separation between the cells. You can see there's some sort of blue film on them. It's quite thin. The case is connected to one of the terminals. So if you had, say, a screw in between the two and it wore through the coating on both cells, you would have a dead short. So please use epoxy boards or similar. There's many things you can use. If you want epoxy boards, we do sell those for both the 105s and for the 314 amp hours. And I've just used the 105s here to make it a bit of a smaller battery and a bit easier to manage. But all the principles are going to be exactly the same between the two. So now that we've done that, we'll go to the bus bars. So be very careful when you do this. Think about what you do before you do it. Maybe think about it twice. What you want to do is you want to have a continuous path. So here I'm going from negative to positive. So you want to be basically sort of snake your way around this way. So if I was to do this, place it here, I'd have a dead short here, there'd be lots of sparks, and it'd be the end of the video. But if I do it correctly, and I think about it, nothing's going to happen, and I can connect them all quite easily. Now, I should also mention that this video might be a little bit different to the PDF instructions that we have. That's fine. Both ways will work. For example, you can connect on the bus bar on this positive terminal of that battery or this negative terminal of that battery. It's completely the same from an electrical point of view. So just a few more. Here we go. Now we also have washers. So you'd put washers on every bus bar like that. I'm not going to use them for this video just because it's it'll make a longer video if I did. So what I will do instead is I'll take the cable, and you can see that it is black, blue, green, yellow, white, blue, green, yellow, red. You have to use the wires in that order. And of course, there's two blues, for example, so make sure you use the right one. But if you do, it's fairly simple. So then you connect the blue here, put a nut on it. As I said, I'll only do it hand tight in this video. If you were doing it for real, I'd probably go sort of 4 to 6 Newton meters of torque on there. If you don't have a torque wrench, just do it up tight a bit. What I like to use is something like this. I have obviously put electrical tape around it, and that is, if I accidentally drop it on here, I'm not going to create a dead short. Hasn't happened yet, but it could theoretically happen. So yeah, just do it up like that, and you're done. And obviously you also have to do this side here. Then on to the next one. I like holding the cable like this, so I can just go one by one. And as I said before, you can put it here, or you can put it there. It's exactly the same. These cells are at the same potential because they're connected via a bus bar. So I'll put this on, and I'll speed up the video from here, so you don't have to wait too long. Okay, that's done now. You can see I did the whole cable, all 9 of them. If you were doing the 8S active balancer to set the BMS to 8S mode, that's all you'd do. So you wouldn't have this bus bar here or the remaining cells. This would be your main positive. This would be your main negative terminal. However, as we're building a 16S battery, we just do the same thing again. So again, starting from black. So you go from red here to black here. And I'll see you in a second. Okay, and that's it. That's all the cables connected. Now, as I said, we do have to connect something else to both the main positive and the main negative up here. If you were building this battery for real, you would actually have a power cable coming off here as well. So it's very important that the power cable goes down the bottom, and then the sensing or balancing wire goes on top. But what we'll also put on is this cable here, and this cable here is made to ensure that you can use your touch screen with a BMS. So you can see there's a red and a black. I think the voltage range of the touch screen is something like 8 to 70 volts. So whether it's 48 volts or 24 volts or 12 volts, it'll work all just fine. So what I'll do here, again, don't worry about the washer here, but I will take this off, put that on, and if you were building your battery, you would now tighten this properly. But as I said, for the positive, you'd put your power cable on first, and then I would put the balancing wire and then this wire on top. So we'll do that here. Okay. Now, this basically would screw into the side wall of your battery. So this part, the wire part, would be on the inside, and this would be protruding through the outside. Of course, today we won't be doing that. We'll just be plugging it in and pretending we were doing that. So I'll give you a close-up, but basically it goes into the discharge switch connector on the BMS. No, it doesn't. It goes into the RS485 connector on the BMS. RS485 is a serial connection protocol, and that's what the screen is using to communicate with the BMS. Now, right now, our BMS isn't doing anything, and that's because we don't have our active balances connected yet. This is very important, which order you connect the things. So what you have to do first is connect the cables we just connected to the battery or to the cells. So you want to start with a 9-pin connector. So it says B- to B8 plus on there. So we'll connect that first. I should also warn you, because there's capacitors on here, when you plug in the cables, it will spark a little bit. It won't be a big spark, but it might just be a bit concerning if you do it the first time. And you'll see that in a second here. Oh, actually, it didn't spark too much then, probably because I'd used this before and some of these capacitors might be having a voltage on them. Now I'll take the second cable, do exactly the same thing here, plug that in. There was a small spark that time. And as I said, it's very important to do this before you plug in the wires from the BMS. Otherwise, the BMS is not going to be set to 16S in this case, or 8S with the other balancer. So what we then do is we take the cables on the BMS and we'll take the larger one of the two first and plug that in. Again, there can be a small spark, but generally there isn't. And then we take the smaller cable. Now we're almost done. A couple of things I haven't mentioned yet is this is the balancer cable. So it basically comes from the BMS into the active balancer. So I'll plug it in. It goes right here. And now the active balancer will run when the BMS runs. The other thing we have is an optional discharge switch, which will connect where it says discharge switch. Now, there is, under function settings, there's a function called switch function. You can either have that on or off. If you have that on, the BMS will only discharge if these two wires are connected. So obviously you can do a push button or something similar. However, I tend to recommend not to use that and have the switch function switched off. The reason for that, I'll be showing you in a second, is we've got the touch screen here, also comes with a kit. So this would be the outside section of the battery box. You plug that in and then you turn the screen on. You can see it's a fairly low state of charge at 15%. But here you can see we've got our discharge switch. That's a soft switch, and we can turn that on and off. I said we can turn that on and off. The switch function on this BMS must be enabled currently, so it won't, we're not able to switch it off unless we connect these. Sorry, we're not able to switch it on unless we connect these two together. So you can see if I'm holding them together, no problem. I can switch it off as I want. So now if I was to drop something on the C- and B+ connection, which will be your terminals on whatever battery box you're building, nothing would happen. There wouldn't be any sparks or anything. I highly recommend you switching it off when you build a battery. Well, not just when you build a battery, when you connect a battery. If you're doing any electrical work on your system, switch it off. Then when you're done, just switch it back on and leave it on. But as you see, if I disconnect these two, this will turn off again. And that's basically because these two switches are in series, which is why I recommend to disable the discharge switch. Now, the final thing I need to tell you about is the NTCs, or temperature probes. Basically, what you do is you take them out of here and you run them to the cells and you stick them down on the cells where they've got some contact with them. Of course, you're not going to be contacting all 16 cells, so spread them out a bit and say, have one here and one there. It's entirely up to you whether you want it to go to the top of the cells or whether you want to go to the sides. And then obviously you've got to stick them down somehow using either Kapton tape, or I like silicone for attaching, and then a bit of tape over the top while it cures. Silicone's heat resistant up to 220 degrees or so. Obviously, we hope our battery never sees that sort of temperature, but it might see, say, 60 degrees, and it's still good to have something heat resistant at that temperature as well. So that is basically it. I will show you a little bit more on the screen. You can basically see each individual cell voltage. And as I said, you can see the state of charge, the voltage, the temperature, the current. Right now, obviously, we're not doing any charging or discharging. And then down here, the time to empty or time to full. When there's no current draw, that's not very accurate. But if you had a current draw of, say, 20 amps, it would be quite accurate. And it obviously takes that snapshot to then extrapolate how much time you've got left. So this is basically it. What I will do now is also connect it in an 8S balancer. So that way you can see it changes modes. So what we have to do first is disconnect this. So we do it in reverse order. So we start with a small connector going to the BMS, then the large one, and then these two. That one's nice and stuck. There we go. Now, I said reverse order. We obviously connected this last, but given that's just giving the balancer a signal to run or not to run, it's not that important what order you do it in. So now, just because I've got it in my hands, I'll plug that in first. As I was saying, I've got a 9-pin plug and an 8-pin. For the 8S, we'll only be using the 9-pin because you only have 8 cells. So you've got 8 cells plus on the end cell, you've got one extra one. So you basically end up with 9 connections. Bit of a spark on there, that's all good. So we've got that connected. Then we will connect the larger of the 2 connectors coming from the BMS, and then the smaller one. Here we go. It just takes a little second to think. Here it's saying 15% as well. And if we go to page number 3, you will see we now just have the 8 voltages. Okay. If you have any questions, comments, please leave them below this video. There's also a link to purchase this BMS. As always, thank you very much for your support. Thank you and goodbye.